Hello, third graders. I'm Mrs. Fessler, and I'm going to do a special guest reading for you guys. I'm sure you were expecting Mrs. Wolf or Mrs. Mechikowski, but I wanted you to get to see me. I can't wait to work with you when you come to class. I'll be popping in and out. So today I'm going to read you a special story. This story is called The Keeping Quilt. Patricia Polacco wrote this story. She's one of my favorite authors. She writes amazing books. So I'm excited that we get to read this book. Few things before we get started. If you take a look at this, you notice the cover. Not everything is in color. Only this blanket is colorful. And another word for a blanket is a quilt. So that must have to do with the keeping quilt for our title. Another thing I want to tell you about Patricia Polacco, she is originally, her family, 6 generations came from Russia. So there's going to be some things that are traditional to Russian culture and where her family is originally from that we're going to read about. It's pretty exciting. Now, this story is a realistic fiction book. That means that it could have happened. She used things that were real in her life, in her own family from her mother's side, to tell this story. But it's made up, so it didn't exactly happen the way the story goes. Let's take a look. When my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots she had worn for farm work, but her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry. It was so crowded, not like back home in Russia, but all the same, it was their home. And most of their neighbors were just like them. Look at this picture. The author did something special to make you see where Anna is. She colored her babushka red. This story is from a long time ago, more than 100 years ago. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into the water. Shh, shh, shh. But in 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them too. The only things I have left of back home Russia were her dress and the babushka she liked to throw up into the air when she was dancing. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a new one, she took her old dress and her babushka. Then from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havela's nightdress, and an apron from Aunt Natasha. We'll make a quilt to help us always remember home, Anna's mother said. It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night. I'm going to go a little closer so you can see this picture. Think about what I just read. They must be missing their family from back home. And if you look at the illustration, these people are very lightly colored. So it shows that they're thinking about their family, but they're not really there. And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies as they needed them. The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka. There are a lot of things here that make this quilt special. It's made from family members' clothing. It's made with all the neighborhood ladies helping. Even even Anna had a job. Everyone's played a special role in this quilt, the keeping quilt. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family had challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. He showed he wanted to be her husband. He gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of salt, all tied into a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower for love, the salt so their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky, and they were engaged. Under the wedding huppah, Anna and Sasha promised each other to love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. So they stood under the huppah. Take a look at this picture. A huppah is a canopy that goes over the bride and groom when they get married. It's a traditional Jewish wedding ceremony. And notice the huppah is made from the keeping quilt. When my grandma Carly was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in a quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carly was given the gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold so she would never know poverty, a flower so she would always know love, salt so her life would always have flavor, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carly learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do the washing. Married you will be someday, Anna told Carly. The Sabbath, we've heard that twice now. Think about that. Have you heard that before? Sabbath means resting and taking part in religious activities from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. So they would not work. They would just do religious activities or keep the Sabbath. Now in our culture, some people go to church on Sundays to keep the Sabbath. Again, the quilt became a wedding huppah, this time for Carly's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. In Carly's wedding bouquet was a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carly and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and great-grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She had grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a kulik, a rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. Do you see the keeping quilt? When great-grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now grown up. When Mary Ellen left home, she took the quilt with her. When she became a bride, the quilt became her huppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit, but in her bouquet were bread, gold, and salt. So there's some differences now. The traditions are starting to change a little. Think about what's changing over time. How is Mary Ellen's wedding like her mother's and her grandmother's wedding, and how are they different? So one thing I'm noticing is that they're the same because they're all under the huppah, and they all have gold, bread, or salt with them. But it's different. A while ago, the men and the women were separate. Then they started to be together, and now they're dancing and celebrating together. So as time goes on, things are changing in the story. The quilt welcomed me, Patricia, into the world, and it was a tablecloth for my first birthday party. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve had made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, and whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. The quilt was a pretend cape when I was bull ringing, and sometimes a tent in the steaming Amazon jungle. At my wedding to Enzo Mario, men and women danced together. In the bouquet were gold, bread, and salt, and a sprinkle of wine, so I always know laughter. And do you see the hoopah? "20 years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. And someday she too will leave home and she will take the quilt with her." What a beautiful story. I wonder if they still use the quilt today. What do you think?